Over the past 3 weeks, the ongoing war between the United States, Israel, and Iran has once again pushed the Middle East to the brink of catastrophe. The conflict, which began on February 28, 2026, under the joint U.S.-Israeli operation codenamed Epic Fury, has involved large-scale airstrikes across Iranian territory. These strikes have resulted in the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the destruction of the Iranian naval fleet, and the obliteration of critical infrastructure such as the Karg Island oil terminal. Just as the conflict appeared to be escalating toward its peak, President Donald Trump unexpectedly announced a 5-day pause in military operations. This article examines the background of the war, the current situation, the growing divergence between the United States and Israel, public opinion, and the possible scenarios for the days ahead. When the United States and Israel launched their attacks on Iran on February 28, 2026, the world braced for a prolonged and devastating conflict. According to U.S. Central Command (CENTCOM), over 5,000 targets were struck within the first 10 days. These attacks destroyed an estimated 80 to 85% of Iran's air defense systems, sank more than 50 naval vessels, and inflicted severe damage on the Karg Island oil terminal, Iran's primary oil export hub. Iran retaliated. Iranian forces launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of drones at Israeli targets and U.S. assets across the Gulf region. However, Iran's most powerful weapon was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil passes. Iran effectively blocked this strategic waterway, causing oil prices to spike to $120 per barrel and placing immense strain on the global economy. Perhaps the most intriguing development in this conflict is the widening rift between the United States and Israel. Last week, Israel struck Iran's South Pars natural gas field, the country's largest energy facility. The United States stated it had not been notified in advance of the attack. President Trump himself publicly declared that no further strikes should take place on that facility. In response, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that he did not consider it necessary to inform the United States beforehand. U.S. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard acknowledged before Congress that the objectives of the United States and Israel are, in fact, different. Israel seeks the complete elimination of Iran's nuclear program, even if that requires striking energy infrastructure and plunging the entire region into a prolonged war. For Israel, this is an existential issue. The United States views the situation differently. Washington is primarily concerned with stabilizing oil prices. It wants to prevent China and Russia from filling any power vacuum that might emerge in Iran. Most importantly, it fears the growing anger of the American public. Since the beginning of the war, opposition among the American public has been steadily rising. A recent CNN poll shows that 59% of Americans disapprove of the war. With midterm congressional elections scheduled for November 2026, a long, costly, and unpopular war could become politically toxic for the White House. This public pressure, combined with electoral politics, is forcing the administration to proceed with caution. Although the U.S. Senate attempted to pass a resolution to halt the war, the resolution ultimately failed. Nevertheless, the anti-war sentiment continues to shape Washington's decision-making. Thus far, the conflict has been largely confined to airstrikes. However, military experts argue that air power alone cannot permanently secure the Strait of Hormuz. If the United States genuinely intends to reopen this waterway or neutralize Iran's nuclear facilities permanently, it will likely have to deploy ground forces. The Pentagon has reportedly developed plans to secure the Strait of Hormuz, a scenario that could require U.S. Marines to land on Iranian soil. This presents a significant dilemma for President Trump, who campaigned on ending endless wars. With 13 American troops already killed and over 7,000 strikes conducted, the option of a ground invasion remains on the table. The White House insists that no final decision has been made, but contingency planning is actively underway. At the heart of this conflict lies Iran's nuclear program. Following the U.S. withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA) in 2018, Iran accelerated its uranium enrichment activities. Before the war began, Iran was enriching uranium at 60% purity, just one step away from weapons-grade level of 90%. The United States claims it is fighting this war to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. U.S. strikes have indeed targeted Iranian nuclear facilities. However, one U.S. official admitted that securing Iran's existing uranium stockpiles would be highly complex and risky. Such an operation would likely require special operations forces to seize nuclear materials in the midst of an active war zone. In the third week of the war, President Trump suddenly announced a 5-day pause in military strikes. He stated that over the previous 2 days, the United States and Iran had engaged in very good and productive conversations. However, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs immediately denied that any direct talks had taken place. Experts believe these communications are indirect, likely facilitated through intermediaries such as Qatar, Oman, or other Gulf states. The primary purpose of this pause appears to be calming oil markets and providing relief to the global economy. Following Trump's announcement, oil prices dropped from $114 to below $99 per barrel. Meanwhile, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) has shown no signs of softening its stance. The IRGC made clear that if the United States targets Iranian electrical infrastructure, Iran will retaliate by striking power plants in Israel and any regional countries hosting U.S. military bases. 3 possible scenarios for the future. According to analysts, the coming days could unfold in one of 3 ways. Scenario 1. Controlled escalation. In this scenario, the United States continues airstrikes against Iran while avoiding a ground invasion. The objective would be to keep Iran weakened without provoking an all-out regional war. This approach minimizes U.S. casualties and political risk while maintaining pressure on Tehran. Scenario 2. The ground trap. If the United States decides to deploy ground forces to secure the Strait of Hormuz or neutralize nuclear facilities, it risks becoming ensnared in a new quagmire. The experiences of Afghanistan and Iraq have demonstrated how costly and protracted ground wars in the Middle East can become. Scenario 3. A temporary agreement. A third possibility is that regional mediators broker a temporary ceasefire. The primary goal of such an agreement would be to restore oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz while deferring the resolution of deeper conflicts to a later date. This would provide short-term economic relief and allow both sides to regroup. One thing has become increasingly clear: this conflict has not unfolded as the United States initially anticipated. While Washington expected Iran to capitulate within days, Tehran continues to resist after 3 weeks of sustained bombardment. President Trump's 5-day pause represents an implicit acknowledgement that the United States is navigating a difficult situation. Further escalation risks alienating the American public and destabilizing the global economy. Complete withdrawal, on the other hand, would damage U.S. credibility and erode the trust of its allies. The next 5 days will determine the trajectory of this conflict. Will this pause mark the first step toward a diplomatic resolution, or is it merely a temporary lull before an even larger storm? Only time will tell.